Susan began her 33 years at MAC in 1988. She devoted her career to pursuing systemic change, using Hubie Jones's model of multi-strategic advocacy. In Susan's first decade with MAC, she began engaging many of these strategies, including litigation. She took over from Tom Mila the Allen v. McDonough case, which was a landmark case that MAC filed in 1976 against the Boston Public Schools for their noncompliance with the then new Chapter 766 special education law. After a 22-year-long legal battle, the case ended with the Boston Public School being brought into compliance with the law and beginning to provide special education resources to Boston students. As the Allen case was wrapping up, and as a result of Susan's work with the Children's Law Support Project, she began to grapple with understanding the impact of violence, especially domestic violence, on children. This work led to her founding the Trauma and Learning Policy Initiative, what we call TLPI. The Trauma and Learning Policy Initiative is a project that really cemented my relationship with MAC. As an advocate for children in the child welfare system, as well as an advocate for victims and survivors of domestic violence, this project brought together two of the issues that I was most passionate about. Susan and I worked very closely at the start of TLPI. We will be sharing some video segments of Susan talking about her work, which were recorded in December of 2020 as part of a funder's project highlighting innovative thinkers, which Susan clearly was.
I started as a special education teacher, and I was in the Watertown Public Schools. I had a resource room in the basement. I went on to go to law school because my goal at the time was to get the students out of the basement. I wanted to be part of the integration movement. And later found myself working at MAC, Mass Advocates for Children, as a lawyer, when all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, the legislature passed in Massachusetts the most onerous school expulsion law. We were getting calls with students getting suspended. And I was representing them as fast as I could go. I was a young lawyer and I was representing them, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't being terribly successful. I was chairing something called the Children's Law Support Project, which was an interdisciplinary project among all the different sort of legal services areas. And I began to work very closely with the people doing domestic violence. The cases just went on and on. And so we began to ask in the cases when I get these calls, like, has there been any violence? And I began to realize there's a connection here. And so there I was with my ahas and standing before what felt like a really big issue. So we formed a task force and we began to all work together in collaboration to figure out what should we be doing? What should we be doing at the policy level? It was very clear to me that in large part, this trauma and these ACEs were impacting language and language development, or the reactivity was really causing kids to get in a lot of trouble. I began to see this is really affecting learning in the classroom. So I started like, this is the purple book. That was the first thing we did, and it was a coming together of many, many people. My whole life's work's been about education schools. Well, any kind of education research will tell you that relationships are absolutely critical to learning. We learn in relationships. We feel safe in relationships. We feel connected in relationships. So safety, connection, belongingness. But then you step back a little further and you say, but that's not how schools are run.
And so began the next decade and a half of Susan's work, addressing the question of how can we help schools create the kinds of environments that are best for teaching and learning by fostering relationships safety, connection, and belonging for everyone, students and educators alike. Let's hear from Susan again.
We did research. We helped, facilitated 5 schools to use the process that we set forth in this book to become trauma sensitive. Here's what we learned. According to the study, the closer the relationships are among the educators, the more they can create an environment for students. So they have to have, it's very important that they have relationships and trust each other. And they can work together to create these environments. So one thing that's different is the collaboration, the teamwork, the proactivity. It's really about infusing these core values: safety, connectivity, and everyone belonging. And it's about relationships, the whole child, relationships, self-regulation, and competence. Because competence, learning is critical to overcoming adversity. But we have to understand there's more to it. There's a foundation to it, and we have to set the conditions, we believe, in law and policy to allow this to happen.
Susan's next set of questions framed the next phase of MAC's TLPI work. How do we set the conditions for system change? Can we make schools more human? The Safe and Supportive Schools Framework statute was a way to move this work forward.
When we were asked to help draft a piece of legislation in Massachusetts for doing this work, really, safe and supportive schools, we defined what a safe and supportive school was. It is inclusive, it was safe, it was supportive, and it supported children in these 4 core domains: relationships, self-regulation, academic and non-academic success, and physical and mental health. And so that became the definition in Massachusetts of what whole child is and what the goal of this legislation was.
Susan also understood the critical importance of addressing the harm of systemic racism and how that impacts what students of color experience in school. Let's listen as she speaks about the need to listen to students and learn from what they have to tell us about what they encounter in school.
I don't think we can move forward with this ACEs movement without dealing with racism and trauma. And we have to learn from the students. I think one thing I could leave you with is I really, really, really have come to believe that we need to listen to students, that the students will tell us, they will lead the way to tell us, what it is that helps them do well in school. And that's really the question of the day. We don't need to have people like me up there saying these things if we can support students to say it themselves, because they know, they live it, and they know what they need. We've got to make that a regular part of it, reform. So everything's turning, got to turn upside down a bit. The students are saying, when I have a relationship with a teacher that works, it's heaven. So I think we're talking, if the students are saying it and the educators are saying it, we got to build that voice. We just have to work together and build that voice till they hear it. It just seems like now's the time. And what can we do to get there? It doesn't take many people to change the world, but it takes a few at least. So none of us can work in isolation.
I principally come because of my great respect and admiration for Susan Cole, who for decades has used her legal knowledge and skills to be a long-distance runner for social justice. And I greatly appreciate you. And when you called me, I couldn't say no.